a patrol officer's disappearance left a community searching for answers, only to have their worst fears confirmed when the disturbing truth emerged 7 years later. The mysterious vanishing of a law enforcement professional, someone trained to protect others, created a void that haunted colleagues and loved ones until the shocking discovery finally revealed what many had dreaded all along. What began as a routine shift in 1991 would spiral into one of the most baffling cold cases in the department's history, with an ending that would send chills down the spines of even the most seasoned investigators. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. On a sunlit September afternoon in 1991, Cedar Falls was rocked by the sudden disappearance of Patrol Officer Ashley Mitchell. Her last radio call at 3:47 p.m. became the haunting echo of a mystery that would grip the town for years. The community, rooted in shared faith and rural pride, rallied together, their hopes illuminated by candlelit vigils that, over time, flickered with the ache of uncertainty. Families taped missing posters to telephone poles, while Ashley's mother, Margaret Mitchell, and younger sister, Jennifer, became the steadfast faces of a desperate search. The retired teacher maintained a quiet strength that inspired many, though privately she clutched her daughter's badge each night in prayer. Jennifer, still a student then, channeled her grief into action, distributing flyers and organizing search parties that combed the wooded areas surrounding Riverside Bridge. As the days dragged into weeks, the golden autumn gave way to the first cruel winter, chilling both the earth and the townspeople's resolve. The initial fervor of the search cooled like the changing season. Police officers who had once worked around the clock began returning to regular duties. Local news outlets, which had initially featured Ashley's story daily, gradually reduced coverage to occasional updates. Margaret refused to let hope die, maintaining a vigil lamp in the front window of the Mitchell family home. "Someone knows something," she would say, her voice never wavering despite the deepening lines of worry on her face. Jennifer, watching her mother's quiet determination, grew increasingly frustrated with what she perceived as the community's waning interest. By the time winter settled fully over Cedar Falls, the case had grown as cold as the snow-covered ground. The local police department, lacking resources and experience with such cases, found themselves at a standstill. Whispers began circulating through church gatherings and grocery store aisles. Perhaps Ashley had simply left town, some suggested, while others hinted at darker possibilities that no one dared voice aloud. For the Mitchell family, each passing day without answers carved another notch of pain. Margaret continued teaching Sunday school, her faith tested but unbroken. Jennifer deferred her college plans, unable to imagine building a future while her sister's fate remained unknown. The town that had once stood united in search of one of their own gradually returned to normal routines, the missing posters fading in the elements, a visual reminder of a mystery that seemed destined to remain unsolved. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Detective Mike Torres hunched over the scattered files in the dimly lit Cedar Falls police station. The Ashley Mitchell case had gone cold years ago, but something about it gnawed at him. As he methodically reviewed each document, inconsistencies began to emerge like shadows taking form. "This doesn't add up," he muttered, comparing witness statements. The trucker's testimony particularly troubled him. In his initial statement, the man claimed to have seen Ashley near Riverside Bridge at 3:30 p.m., but in a follow-up interview 3 weeks later, he changed the time to 4:15 p.m., a critical discrepancy that completely altered the timeline. Torres made detailed notes, his technology-driven approach a stark contrast to the handwritten reports that filled the original case files. He wondered how such an obvious contradiction had been overlooked. The detective's own unresolved family tragedy fueled his determination. He understood all too well the agony of questions left unanswered. The following day, Torres began interviewing townspeople. Each conversation followed a troubling pattern. They welcomed him politely, offered coffee in ceramic mugs, and answered his questions with carefully measured words. But their eyes told a different story. Darting glances, sudden interest in the floor patterns, hands that fidgeted nervously with tablecloths. "I always liked Ashley," said the owner of the local diner. "Such a shame what happened." But when Torres pressed for details about the days surrounding her disappearance, the man's demeanor changed. "I don't recall much else. It was a busy time." This response echoed throughout Cedar Falls. People remembered Ashley fondly, but claimed haziness about specific details. Torres sensed something deeper than faulty memory, a deliberate silence that blanketed the town like the morning fog over the nearby hills. When he visited Margaret Mitchell, Ashley's mother welcomed him with quiet dignity. Her hands trembled slightly as she served tea, but her resolve remained unshaken. "They've stopped looking," she said simply, "but I never will." Jennifer, Ashley's younger sister, watched Torres from across the room, her eyes assessing him with fierce intensity. "Will you actually do something?" she finally asked. "Or are you just another detective passing through?" The captain had warned Torres to tread lightly. "Cedar Falls values its reputation," he'd cautioned. "Don't go stirring up trouble where there might be none." But as Torres drove back to his temporary apartment that evening, he knew the trouble was already there, buried beneath years of polite smiles and careful evasions. Something dark lurked in Cedar Falls. Secrets kept for the sake of appearances, truths sacrificed on the altar of small-town tranquility. And Detective Mike Torres was determined to uncover them all, regardless of who might want them to stay buried. The investigation was stagnating until Kevin Walsh, a geology student at Cedar Falls Community College, approached Detective Mike Torres with an unusual offer. The young man had been following the case since childhood and believed his knowledge of the local terrain could help identify overlooked search areas. "The landscape around Riverside Bridge has changed significantly since 1991, Kevin explained, spreading detailed topographical maps across Torres's cluttered desk. "Seasonal flooding, erosion, even minor seismic activity, they all leave signatures that might have concealed evidence." Torres, initially skeptical, was impressed by the student's methodical approach. Kevin's enthusiasm was infectious, his expertise undeniable. The detective arranged for him to access the case files related to Ashley Mitchell's last known coordinates. Jennifer Mitchell had been volunteering at the investigation headquarters since Torres reopened the case. At 25, she'd grown into a determined young woman whose quiet demeanor masked an unwavering resolve to find answers about her sister's disappearance. When Torres introduced her to Kevin, something sparked between them, a shared purpose that transcended the professional. "Your sister's patrol car was found here," Kevin pointed to a marker on his digital terrain model. But the search radius never properly accounted for the flash flood that occurred 3 days after she vanished. Jennifer nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. Ashley knew these woods better than anyone. If she was trying to find shelter, together, they began weekend expeditions, methodically exploring areas that had been overlooked in the original search. Torres joined when he could, but increasingly it became Jennifer and Kevin's mission. On their 4th outing, while examining a densely overgrown hillside, Kevin noticed something unusual about the vegetation pattern. Certain plants were growing in a perfect circle, suggesting disturbed soil beneath. "This doesn't look natural," he said, carefully clearing away tangled vines. Jennifer helped him remove layers of undergrowth until they uncovered what appeared to be wooden boards partially collapsed inward. They had found the entrance to an abandoned mine shaft, one that wasn't on any official maps. "We need Torres," Jennifer whispered, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. The discovery electrified the investigation. As they waited for proper equipment to safely explore the shaft, Jennifer and Kevin found themselves spending more time together, reviewing maps over coffee, discussing theories late into the evening, their hands occasionally brushing against each other's. What had begun as a professional collaboration was evolving into something deeper. Both recognized it, but remained focused on their shared purpose: finding Ashley. Yet in those quiet moments between discoveries, a different kind of connection was forming, one built on mutual respect, shared determination, and the unexpected intimacy that comes from pursuing truth together. The descent into the abandoned mineshaft felt like entering another world. Detective Mike Torres led the way, his boots crunching on loose gravel as he carefully navigated the rotting wooden ladder. Jennifer Mitchell and Kevin Walsh followed close behind, their faces tense with anticipation. "Watch your step," Torres called back, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Some of these supports look ready to give way." The air grew thicker as they descended, heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Decades of abandonment had transformed the mine into a tomb of broken beams and rusted equipment. Jennifer's heart pounded against her ribs, hope and dread battling within her. The geological surveys showed this shaft wasn't properly documented in the original search, Kevin explained, his voice echoing slightly against the stone walls. The young geology student moved with surprising confidence, pointing out features in the rock formation that suggested recent disturbance. 50 feet below ground, Torres signaled for them to spread out. Their flashlight beams danced across the cavern, illuminating forgotten tools and debris. Jennifer stepped carefully around a fallen support beam, her eyes scanning every inch of the darkness for any sign of her sister. "Over here!" Torres called suddenly, his voice tight with tension. Nestled between two rocks lay a battered police radio, its black casing covered in a thin film of dust. The detective crouched beside it, his gloved hands carefully turning the device over. "That's department issue," he murmured, examining the faded numbers on the back. "Same model Ashley would have carried." Jennifer's breath caught in her throat as Torres pressed the power button, a gesture born more of instinct than expectation. To everyone's shock, the radio crackled to life, a faint green light glowing in the darkness. "That's impossible," Kevin whispered, moving closer. "These batteries shouldn't last more than a few months." Torres felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the mine's temperature. "Someone's been down here, recently." His mind raced through the implications. The original search teams covered this area. If they missed this shaft entirely, "She could have been down here for days," Jennifer finished, her voice breaking. "Maybe even weeks." The detective nodded grimly. "And someone came back to plant this radio. Someone who wanted us to find it eventually, but not right away." Kevin placed a comforting hand on Jennifer's shoulder as she struggled to process this revelation. The radio's eerie glow seemed to mock them, a ghost from the past, suddenly animated. "We need to search every inch of this place," Torres said, his determination hardening. "And I want the lab to analyze this radio immediately. Whoever placed it here might have left traces behind." As they continued their search, the weight of what they'd discovered hung heavy in the stale air. Ashley Mitchell's disappearance was no longer just a cold case. It was an active crime scene with a perpetrator who might still be watching their every move. The beam of light from Detective Mike Torres's flashlight caught something wedged behind a rotting support beam. His heart quickened as he reached into the narrow space, fingers brushing against what felt like leather. Carefully, he extracted a small mud-caked book with tattered edges. "I found something," he called to the team, his voice echoing through the damp mineshaft. As he wiped away decades of grime, unmistakable initials appeared on the cover: A.M. The diary belonged to Ashley Mitchell. The team fell silent as Torres gently opened it, revealing page after page of increasingly desperate entries. Ashley had survived the initial disappearance, trapped in this underground prison for 23 days. "Day 1, Torres read aloud, his voice barely steady. Fell through rotted boards, radio dead, leg injured but not broken. Someone will find me soon. Jennifer Mitchell, who had insisted on being present for the search, covered her mouth with trembling hands. The diary chronicled her sister's ordeal in heartbreaking detail, her initial confidence in rescue, the rationing of the energy bar in her pocket, her attempts to find another way out, and finally, the slow creep of despair. Day 15, Torres continued. Water seeping from walls, keeping me alive. Can't feel my fingers anymore. Keep thinking of Mom and Jen. Please don't let them forget me. The detective paused, swallowing hard. The words transported him back to his own family's tragedy, his brother's disappearance when they were teenagers, a case that remained unsolved. The parallels were too close, too raw. The final entry, dated 23 days after Ashley's disappearance, contained just 3 words: "Finally going home." The simple phrase hung in the air, devastating in its ambiguity. Had she found a way out? Had someone found her? Or had she simply accepted death as her final journey home? Torres closed the diary and placed it carefully in an evidence bag. This wasn't just another cold case anymore. The patrol officer's words had pierced something deep within him, bridging the gap between professional duty and personal wound. "We'll find the truth," he promised Jennifer, who stood pale-faced beside him. Whatever happened after this entry, we'll find it. As they climbed back toward daylight, Torres felt the weight of the diary in his pack, a testament to Ashley's extraordinary resilience and a key that might finally unlock the mystery. For the first time since taking the case, he felt certain they were on the right track. What had been a search for closure was now something more urgent. Someone had known Ashley was down here. Someone had either rescued her or ensured her silence. Either way, the diary transformed the investigation from a historical. Bill Morrison sat across from Detective Mike Torres at a weathered picnic table on the edge of his property, far from any prying eyes or listening ears. The rancher's hands trembled as he clutched his coffee mug, his weathered face etched with the burden of a secret kept for too long. "I saw her," Morrison finally whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "Back in '91, just after Thanksgiving. A woman, badly hurt, stumbling along the creek that runs through the north end of my property." Torres leaned forward, careful to keep his expression neutral, despite the adrenaline surging through him. "And you believe this woman was Ashley Mitchell?" "Couldn't see her face clear, but she wore what looked like parts of a uniform." Morrison's eyes darted nervously toward the road. "I should have helped her. Should have called someone. But then I heard other voices coming and I hid." The detective watched as guilt contorted the rancher's features. Morrison explained how his second cousin had married into the Harrington family, the same family that had produced 3 state senators and currently controlled much of the regional hospital's board of directors. "They made it clear, Detective. Family protects family, and questions about certain things weren't welcome." Morrison's voice cracked. "I convinced myself she was probably just some hiker who got lost. But then when I heard about the police officer..." Torres carefully documented every detail, pressing gently when Morrison's resolve wavered. The rancher described how he'd later found a torn piece of fabric caught on a fence post, dark blue with what might have been a badge insignia. "I burned it," he admitted, shame evident in his downcast eyes. "My wife was pregnant with our first child. I couldn't risk. I just couldn't." As Morrison spoke, Torres felt the case shifting beneath him like unstable ground. This wasn't just about a missing officer anymore. The connections to powerful families, the hospital board, the deliberate silence, it suggested something far more insidious than a random disappearance. "Mr. Morrison," Torres said carefully, "has anyone else ever approached you about what you saw?" The rancher's pallor answered before his words did. Two men came by the following spring, said they were from the state police, but something felt off. They asked if I'd seen anything unusual the previous fall. I lied. Torres nodded, his mind racing to connect these new threads to the diary found in the mineshaft. If Ashley had survived for weeks after her disappearance, as the diary suggested, and Morrison had seen her after Thanksgiving, then someone had moved her, perhaps multiple times. As he drove away from the ranch, Torres couldn't shake the feeling that Ashley Mitchell's fate was entangled in something far larger and more dangerous than he had initially imagined. A web of power, privilege, and deadly secrets that reached into the highest levels of Cedar Falls society. Jennifer Mitchell hunched over the dusty archives in the county records office, her fingers tracing property deeds while Kevin Walsh balanced his laptop on a nearby filing cabinet. After 3 weeks of hitting dead ends with official channels, they had decided to pursue their own investigation. "Look at this," Jennifer whispered, sliding a yellow document across the table. Mackenzie Ranch changed hands in 1990, just months before Ashley disappeared. Kevin adjusted his glasses and studied the paperwork. "Purchased by Evergreen Holdings LLC," he noted, typing rapidly. "That's interesting. This company doesn't seem to exist anywhere except on paper." The pair worked through lunch, tracing the shell company through a maze of legal filings. By evening, they had uncovered a disturbing connection. Evergreen Holdings was financially linked to State Senator Richard Caldwell, a man whose influence stretched throughout the region, including the hospital where Ashley might have been treated. "This could be why Detective Torres is hitting so many roadblocks," Jennifer said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "My sister vanishes and a powerful politician secretly buys property nearby through a fake company?" The following day, they drove out to Mackenzie Ranch, parking half a mile away to avoid detection. The property, once a thriving cattle operation, now sat abandoned behind rusted gates. Local teenagers had long spread stories about ghostly apparitions and strange lights, keeping most curious visitors at bay. "Those rumors might have been convenient," Kevin observed as they hiked through the underbrush. "Perfect way to keep people away." The land seemed to resist their presence. Thorny bushes snagged their clothing, and the muddy ground made each step laborious. Jennifer stumbled over exposed roots, but pressed forward with determination that reminded Kevin of her sister's reputation for tenacity. Using his geological training, Kevin identified areas where the ground had been recently disturbed. "Someone's been here within the last month," he said, pointing to tire tracks partially hidden by new growth. Near the main barn, Jennifer discovered fresh cigarette butts and food wrappers. "This place isn't abandoned at all," she whispered. "It's still active. They photographed everything, the buildings, the tracks, even the serial numbers on a padlock securing one of the outbuildings." As dusk approached, they reluctantly retreated, both sensing they were treading on dangerous ground. That night, Jennifer called Detective Torres, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "We found something you need to see," she said, explaining their discovery of the shell company and the ranch's continued use. Torres listened carefully, concern evident in his voice. "This connects to what Bill Morrison told me," he admitted. "But Jennifer, you need to be careful. If what we suspect is true, if powerful people are involved in what happened to Ashley, then you and Kevin could be putting yourselves at risk." Jennifer gripped the phone tighter. "I've been at risk since the day my sister disappeared," she replied. "We're not stopping now." Detective Mike Torres slammed his fist on the desk, scattering the carefully arranged case files. The rejection letter from Judge Harmon lay before him, another dead end in his quest to search Mackenzie Ranch. "Insufficient evidence to justify intrusion on private property," the document read, the formal language masking what Torres knew was fear of political backlash. "They're protecting someone," he muttered, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. 3 separate warrant applications, 3 rejections. The detective had presented compelling circumstantial evidence. The shell company ownership, Morrison's testimony, the suspicious timing of land transfers, but the local judiciary remained unmoved. Captain Reynolds leaned against the doorframe of Torres's cramped office, his expression a mixture of concern and frustration. "Mike, the Sanderson homicide needs attention. 3 active cases are sitting on your desk while you chase ghosts." "Ashley Mitchell isn't a ghost," Torres replied sharply. "She was a police officer, one of our own." "It's been 7 years," the captain sighed. "The department has limited resources. I can't justify." "Then don't," Torres interrupted. "I'll use my personal time." After Reynolds left, Torres stared at the map of Cedar Falls pinned to his wall. The Mackenzie Ranch circled in red marker. Something was happening there. He could feel it in his bones. At home that night, Torres barely touched his dinner. His wife, Elena, watched him with growing concern as he spread case notes across their dining table. "You promised we'd talk about the weekend," she said quietly. "I just need to review these statements again," he replied without looking up. "Mike, you haven't slept properly in weeks. This case is consuming you." When he finally glanced up, Elena had already left the room. The distance between them stretched wider each day, another casualty of his obsession. Later, unable to sleep, Torres returned to his makeshift investigation board in the spare bedroom. Photographs of Ashley, Jennifer, and Margaret Mitchell stared back at him. He'd promised them answers. The thought of failing the Mitchell family gnawed at him worse than his persistent headaches. Dawn found the detective still awake, nursing his 4th cup of coffee. His reflection in the bathroom mirror revealed a man he barely recognized. Gaunt face, dark circles under his eyes, a persistent tremor in his hands. The doctor had warned him about stress-induced hypertension last month, but Torres had dismissed the concern. Pulling on his jacket, he decided to drive by the ranch again. No warrant meant no official search, but perhaps he could spot something from the perimeter. As he grabbed his keys, Torres noticed Elena's note on the counter. "Marriage counselor, Thursday, 5 p.m. Please don't forget again." He folded the paper carefully and placed it in his wallet, knowing in his heart he would likely miss another appointment. The truth about Ashley Mitchell had become his North Star, even as it led him away from everything else that mattered. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, unremarkable except for the absence of a return address. Margaret Mitchell's hands trembled as she slid a single sheet of paper from inside. The handwriting was neat but hurried, as though written by someone looking over their shoulder. Ashley was admitted to Cedar Falls Regional on October 3, 1991, the letter stated. She was registered under the name Jane Reynolds, with injuries consistent with a fall. Dr. Whitman treated her personally and kept her isolated from regular staff. Councilman Edwards visited twice after hours. Margaret collapsed into her kitchen chair, breath catching in her throat. These were details no one outside the investigation could possibly know. Ashley's diary had mentioned a fall, and Councilman Edwards was the same politician connected to the Mackenzie Ranch property. "This can't be coincidence," she whispered, reaching for the phone to call Jennifer. Before she could dial, a sharp pain lanced through her left side. The room tilted sideways as Margaret clutched at her chest, the letter fluttering to the floor as darkness closed in. Jennifer found her mother unconscious 40 minutes later. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and urgent voices. At the hospital, the very one mentioned in the anonymous letter, doctors confirmed Margaret had suffered a moderate stroke. She would survive, but recovery would be long and uncertain. Detective Mike Torres arrived at the hospital within the hour, his face grim as Jennifer handed him the letter. "This changes everything," he said, studying the paper through an evidence bag. "Someone on the inside is finally talking." Jennifer Mitchell pushed her hair back from her face, exhaustion etched into every line. "Mom was our strength through all this. I don't know if I can do this alone." Torres placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone." Over the next 3 days, Jennifer divided her time between her mother's bedside and meetings with Torres. The detective attempted to trace the letter, but found nothing. No fingerprints, no DNA, not even a distinctive watermark on the paper. "Whoever sent this knows how to cover their tracks," Torres explained in the hospital cafeteria, his coffee untouched. "That suggests someone with police or legal training." Jennifer stared out the window at the town that had harbored these secrets for years. Everyone in Cedar Falls acts like they're so righteous, so concerned with doing what's proper. But they've been protecting monsters. As Margaret drifted in and out of consciousness, Jennifer sat beside her, holding her hand and making a silent promise. The burden of seeking justice for Ashley now rested squarely on her shoulders, a weight that should have crushed her, but instead hardened her resolve like carbon under pressure. "I'll find the truth, Mom," she whispered. "For Ashley, for all of us." The anonymous letter arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. Margaret Mitchell's hands trembled as she unfolded the single sheet of paper. The contents were devastating. Someone claimed Ashley had been admitted to Cedar Falls Regional Hospital under a false name in the weeks following her disappearance. The writer implicated State Senator Richard Harmon, whose family connections to the hospital board were well known throughout the county. Detective Mike Torres studied the letter carefully, noting details only someone intimately familiar with Ashley's case would know. "This is our first real lead in months," he told Margaret, whose weathered face showed both hope and fear. The detective wasted no time. Early the next morning, he arrived at the hospital's records department, badge in hand. "I need to see all patient files from September through December 1991, Torres requested, his voice firm but professional. Hours later, frustration etched lines across his face. Several critical files were conspicuously absent, particularly those from the 3-day period following Ashley's last radio transmission. The records clerk appeared genuinely confused by the gaps. "Files don't just vanish," Torres muttered, making detailed notes of the missing dates. Through discreet questioning, he identified Elaine Winters, a nurse who had worked in the emergency department during that period. Now employed at a clinic 2 towns over, she reluctantly agreed to meet Torres at a diner halfway between Cedar Falls and her new home. She never showed. When Torres called the clinic the following day, a nervous receptionist informed him that Elaine had suddenly taken an indefinite leave of absence. Her apartment stood empty, neighbors reporting she'd left in the middle of the night with a single suitcase. The pattern was becoming clear. Evidence disappeared. Witnesses vanished. Someone powerful was actively maintaining the silence surrounding Ashley Mitchell's fate. That evening, Torres drove to the Mitchell home, finding Jennifer alone on the porch swing. Margaret had suffered a severe stroke after reading the letter, the emotional shock proving too much for her fragile health. She now lay in the very hospital at the center of their investigation. "They're covering something terrible," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom always believed Ashley was still alive somewhere. Now I wonder if she was right, at least for a while." Torres sat beside her, the wooden swing creaking beneath their weight. "I believe your sister was alive after she disappeared," he confessed. "And I think powerful people made decisions that sealed her fate." Their eyes met in the gathering darkness, a moment of shared understanding passing between them. "I won't stop," Jennifer promised. "Neither will I," Torres replied, his determination matching hers. "Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from." The forensics team arrived at dawn, their equipment glinting in the early morning light. Detective Mike Torres watched as they carefully examined Ashley Mitchell's motorcycle, which had been discovered in a ravine just over 2 miles south of Riverside Bridge. The vehicle had been partially covered with branches and debris, seemingly abandoned in haste. "Something's not right," said the lead forensic analyst, her brow furrowed as she studied soil samples taken from beneath the motorcycle. "These sediment layers don't match what we'd expect for something that's been here since 1991. Torres crouched beside her, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying this motorcycle was moved recently. The soil compression and mineral composition suggest it was placed here no more than 3 or 4 months ago." The revelation hit Torres like a physical blow. For years, the discovery of the patrol officer's abandoned motorcycle had been considered one of the few concrete pieces of evidence in her disappearance. Now, even that certainty was stripped away. "Someone's been maintaining the scene," Torres muttered, more to himself than to the team around him, creating an illusion of abandonment. Back at the station, Torres pinned new photos to his increasingly crowded investigation board. The detective's eyes were bloodshot from lack of sleep, his marriage suffering under the weight of his obsession with the case. He couldn't let go, not when every new discovery suggested a deliberate effort to mislead investigators. Who would have both the knowledge and opportunity to move evidence years after the fact? He asked Jennifer Mitchell when she visited the station that afternoon. Ashley's younger sister had grown into a determined young woman, her features hardening with each passing year of searching for answers. "Someone who knew the original investigation inside and out," she suggested. "Someone who's been watching all this time." Torres nodded slowly. "And someone who panicked when I started asking new questions." The investigation needed to pivot. Torres began compiling a list of individuals with both motive and opportunity, focusing particularly on those connected to the hospital records and the Mackenzie Ranch property. The detective methodically cross-referenced their whereabouts during the period when the motorcycle must have been relocated. "Whoever moved that motorcycle made a critical mistake," Torres told Jennifer. "They thought they were covering their tracks, but instead they've confirmed what we've suspected all along." "That Ashley's disappearance wasn't random," Jennifer said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Torres agreed, staring at the photographs. "This was deliberate, and whoever did this is still actively working to hide the truth." The motorcycle, once thought to be the end of Ashley's journey, had become a new beginning for the investigation, pointing toward individuals who still had everything to lose if the truth came to light. Jennifer Mitchell had spent years living in the shadow of her sister's disappearance, but her partnership with Kevin Walsh had awakened something in her, a courage she hadn't known she possessed. With Detective Mike Torres focused on the forensic re-examination of Ashley's motorcycle, Jennifer decided to pursue another angle. "The hospital records are our best lead," she told Kevin one evening as they sat in her car, outside Cedar Falls Regional. "Someone here knows something." The geology student squeezed her hand. "I'll be right beside you." For 3 days, they approached hospital staff with carefully worded questions. Most responses were polite but evasive, tight smiles and sympathetic nods that offered nothing of substance. Jennifer noticed how eyes would dart away when Ashley's name was mentioned, how conversations would suddenly shift. "They're afraid," Kevin observed after another fruitless interview. But afraid of what? On the 4th day, Jennifer spotted an elderly woman leaving through a side entrance, Nurse Gladys Parker, according to her name tag, who'd worked at the hospital for over 30 years. Something about her stooped shoulders and careful gaze suggested a person carrying a heavy burden. "Mrs. Parker," Jennifer called, hurrying over. "Please, just 5 minutes about my sister." The nurse hesitated, glancing nervously toward the hospital windows. "I shouldn't be talking to you." "Please," Jennifer's voice cracked. "She was my sister." Something in Gladys's expression softened. She led them to a bench, partially hidden by overgrown bushes. "I remember that week," she whispered. "A young woman came in. Severe trauma. Dehydration. She matched your sister's description, but the chart said Jane Roberts." Jennifer's heart pounded. "Was it Ashley?" "I can't say for certain, but Administrator Collins insisted on handling her case personally. Unusual protocol." Gladys looked down at her weathered hands. "The patient was kept isolated, 6th floor, restricted access. Then one night, she was gone. No discharge papers." "Who authorized this?" Kevin asked. "Orders came from above, way above." Gladys stood abruptly, That's all I know. Please don't contact me again." As the nurse hurried away, Jennifer sat frozen, processing the implications. Ashley had been alive after her disappearance, treated in the very hospital that had claimed no record of her. The conspiracy wasn't just about covering up a crime, it was about actively hiding a living victim. "This changes everything," Jennifer whispered to Kevin. "She didn't just vanish. People, powerful people, made decisions about her life." Torres needed to hear this immediately. The web of deception was more intricate, more deliberate than any of them had imagined. And somewhere in Cedar Falls, those responsible were still walking free. The handwriting expert adjusted her glasses, leaning closer to the note that had been found inside Ashley Mitchell's helmet. Jennifer held her breath, watching the woman's face for any reaction. After 3 days of meticulous analysis, the verdict was devastating. "I'm sorry," the expert said, sliding the report across the table. "The farewell note is a forgery. Someone went to great lengths to imitate your sister's handwriting, but the pressure points and stroke patterns are inconsistent with her known samples." Jennifer's hands trembled as she accepted the document. For years, the family had clung to the comfort that Ashley had written a final goodbye, that she'd had some measure of peace in her final moments. Now, that small mercy was revealed as just another lie. Detective Mike Torres placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "Someone wanted you and your mother to believe Ashley died on her own terms." The implications were chilling. Not only had Ashley been taken, but someone had calculated enough to craft this false comfort for the family. Torres paced the small conference room, his mind racing through possibilities. The forgery required intimate knowledge of Ashley's handwriting, access to her personal documents, and the skill to replicate them convincingly. "They wanted us to stop looking," Jennifer whispered, the realization washing over her. "They created closure where there wasn't any." When Jennifer showed the report to Margaret that evening, her mother's face crumpled. The stroke had left the older woman with limited mobility on her right side, but her eyes remained clear and penetrating. She touched the falsified note with trembling fingers. "I always felt something was wrong with it," Margaret confessed. The words, they weren't how Ashley would speak, but I wanted so badly to believe she had peace. Kevin Walsh arrived later with dinner, a gesture that had become routine as he supported Jennifer through each new development. The geology student listened intently as she explained the forgery, his scientific mind immediately connecting dots. "This means whoever did this had access to Ashley's personal effects before the motorcycle was discovered," he reasoned. "They knew exactly what they were doing." Torres called that night with another troubling detail. The paper used for the note dated from 1993, 2 years after Ashley's disappearance. The deception wasn't improvised. It was calculated, patient, and executed with precision. As Jennifer lay awake that night, she realized the truth they were uncovering was far darker than she had imagined. Someone powerful enough to orchestrate a disappearance, manipulate evidence, and craft a forgery had been watching them grieve for years. The question haunting her wasn't just who had taken her sister anymore, but who had been cruel enough to script her final words. The investigation circled back to Mackenzie Ranch, a property that had lingered at the edges of their suspicions for months. Kevin Walsh studied satellite imagery of the area, his geology training allowing him to spot what others had missed: subtle depressions in the earth, near an old well, suggesting recent activity. "Someone's been digging there," Kevin explained to Jennifer Mitchell as they examined the maps spread across her kitchen table. "The soil displacement patterns are too uniform to be natural erosion." Jennifer's eyes locked with his. "We need to tell Mike." Detective Mike Torres was initially hesitant. A covert search without a warrant could jeopardize any evidence they found. But the continuous roadblocks from local authorities left few alternatives. "If we find something concrete, we can bring in federal investigators," Torres reasoned. his dedication to the case overriding professional caution. Under the cover of darkness, the three made their way to the ranch. Kevin led them to the well, where they began a careful excavation of the disturbed area. Jennifer's hands trembled as she sifted through the soil, her determination to find answers about her sister unwavering despite years of disappointment. Their persistence was rewarded with a heartbreaking discovery. Buried beneath 2 feet of earth, they uncovered a tarnished police badge, its numbers matching Ashley's. Nearby lay a woman's wristwatch with the inscription, "To Ashley with love, Mom." Jennifer recognized it immediately. The graduation gift Margaret had given her sister. "This was hers," she whispered, clutching the watch to her chest. Torres carefully collected soil samples where dark stains suggested the presence of blood. His expression remained professional, but his eyes betrayed the weight of what they'd found. 3 days later, the forensic results confirmed their worst fears. The blood matched Ashley Mitchell's DNA profile. The location was now officially a crime scene, a place where violence had occurred. For Jennifer, the discovery brought a contradictory flood of emotions. The confirmation that her sister had suffered here was devastating. Yet finding tangible evidence after years of uncertainty offered a strange, painful relief. "At least now we know," she told Torres, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "We can stop wondering." The detective nodded solemnly. This breakthrough would finally force authorities to acknowledge what they had been fighting to prove, that Ashley's disappearance wasn't just a missing person case, but something far more sinister involving the ranch and its powerful connections. Kevin placed a supportive hand on Jennifer's shoulder as Torres made the call that would escalate the investigation beyond local jurisdiction. The truth was emerging from the soil of Cedar Falls, as inevitable as the changing seasons that had passed since Ashley first vanished. Detective Mike Torres marched into Captain Richard Dawson's office, clutching a manila folder filled with evidence that could no longer be ignored. The blood samples from Mackenzie Ranch had come back positive. They belonged to Ashley Mitchell. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It was murder. "You need to back off, Torres," the captain warned, his weathered face hardening as he glanced at the closed door. "This town has been through enough. We've got the county fair coming up, tourism dollars we desperately need." Torres couldn't believe what he was hearing. "A police officer was murdered, and you're worried about tourism?" The captain leaned forward, lowering his voice. "People with influence are getting nervous. The mayor called me twice this week. The hospital board is lawyering up. This goes deeper than you realize." "All the more reason to push forward," Torres insisted, thinking of Margaret Mitchell's frail form in her hospital bed, of Jennifer's unwavering determination despite everything she'd lost. Captain Dawson's fist came down hard on his desk. "One more unauthorized investigation and you're suspended. That's not a threat. It's a promise." Torres walked out, the folder still clutched in his hand. He wouldn't back down. Not now, not when they were so close to the truth. By evening, word had spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire. Torres noticed the stares as he grabbed coffee at the local diner. Some nodded respectfully, others turned away. The waitress who'd always chatted with him now silently refilled his cup, avoiding eye contact. "My brother says you're stirring up trouble for no reason," she finally muttered. "Ashley's been gone for years. Why can't you let her rest in peace?" "Because she deserves justice," Torres replied quietly. Outside the diner, he found Jennifer Mitchell waiting by his vehicle. Her eyes were red-rimmed but determined. "They're trying to shut you down, aren't they?" she asked. Torres nodded. The captain threatened suspension. "Half the town thinks you're a hero," Jennifer said, wrapping her coat tighter against the evening chill. "The other half wishes you'd never come here." "And what do you think?" Torres asked. "I think my sister would be alive if someone like you had been here 7 years ago." Later that night, Torres sat alone in his apartment, case files spread across the kitchen table. His wife had left 3 months earlier, unable to compete with the ghosts that drove him. The phone rang. Kevin Walsh calling with news about additional soil samples he'd collected from the ranch. As Torres listened to the young geologist's findings, he realized just how isolated he'd become. The department had abandoned him, the town was divided, and his marriage was over. But he had the Mitchells, he had Kevin, and most importantly, he had the truth. And sometimes that had to be enough. The first snowfall of winter blanketed Cedar Falls, transforming the town into a postcard-perfect scene that belied the darkness beneath. Detective Mike Torres stood in the police station, evidence spread before him as Captain Reynolds slammed his fist on the desk. "You're treading dangerous ground, Torres. This town has been through enough without you stirring up ghosts," the captain warned, his face flushed with anger. "The department's reputation is at stake here." Torres straightened his back, unflinching. "With all due respect, sir, Ashley Mitchell's life was at stake, and someone in this town, someone with power, made sure she disappeared." The captain's voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "One more step, and I'll have your badge. Focus on current cases or face suspension." Walking out into the bitter cold, Mike felt the isolation creeping in. The town had divided into camps, those who whispered thanks when he passed in the grocery store, and others who crossed the street to avoid him. Cedar Falls was fracturing along fault lines of loyalty, fear, and guilt. That evening, Jennifer Mitchell called him, her voice trembling with excitement and fear. "Another letter came," she said. "This one names names, Mike. It describes exactly how Ashley was admitted to the regional hospital under the name Jane Davis. It mentions Dr. Phillips signing off on transfer papers that don't exist anymore." "Who delivered it?" Torres asked, already reaching for his keys. "That's the thing. It was inside my mailbox, no postage, someone local." At Jennifer's home, they examined the letter together. The handwriting was disguised, but the details were painfully specific. Medication dosages, nurse rotations, even the color of the blanket Ashley had been given. "This person was there," Jennifer whispered, her fingers tracing the words. "They saw my sister alive." Torres nodded grimly, "And they're terrified. Look at the pressure marks. They wrote this in a hurry. But why now? Why not come forward years ago?" "Because they're watching you," Margaret said from the doorway, leaning heavily on her walker. Her stroke had weakened her body, but not her mind. "They see you pushing forward where others gave up." Later that night, Kevin Walsh joined them, bringing geological surveys of the Mackenzie Ranch property. The four of them formed an unlikely alliance: the detective, the sister, the geology student, and the ailing mother, united against the town's powerful silence. "Someone wants the truth out," Torres said, "but they're too afraid to stand beside us." Jennifer's eyes hardened with resolve. "Then we'll stand for them, and for Ashley." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering tracks both old and new, but no longer able to bury the truth that was finally rising to the surface. As winter settled heavily over Cedar Falls, Detective Mike Torres spread the evidence across his dining room table. The purchase documents for Mackenzie Ranch, hospital admission records, and photographs of Ashley Mitchell's forged farewell note formed a damning constellation of deceit. He connected them with red string, creating a physical manifestation of the web he'd been untangling for months. The detective ran his fingers through his disheveled hair, eyes burning from lack of sleep. Each piece alone might be dismissed, but together they told a horrifying story of power abused and justice denied. The property records revealed the shell company that purchased the ranch traced back to State Senator Whitmore, whose brother-in-law happened to be the hospital administrator in 1991. Jennifer Mitchell called just as dawn broke, her voice trembling with urgency. "Mike, I received another letter," she said. Unlike the first cryptic message delivered to Margaret's home, this one contained explicit details about Ashley's first days in the hospital. Names of attending nurses, medications administered, and even conversations overheard between hospital staff and local officials. The writer mentions Dr. Lester specifically, Jennifer continued. Says he falsified admission records under direct pressure from administration. Torres felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Dr. Lester had died in a single-vehicle accident just 3 months after Ashley's disappearance, an accident that suddenly seemed far less accidental. Someone close wants the truth out, Torres muttered, studying the neat handwriting. Someone who was there, but is too afraid to come forward directly. Jennifer arrived at his house that afternoon with Kevin Walsh. The geology student had grown more confident in his role, no longer just Jennifer's supportive companion, but an investigator in his own right. The three huddled around Torres's evidence board, identifying potential authors of the anonymous letters. It could be the nurse who disappeared before your interview, Jennifer suggested, her determination unwavering despite the emotional toll of the investigation. Or someone still working at the hospital, Kevin added. Someone who's watched this cover-up for years and can't live with it anymore. Torres nodded, his mind already moving to the next step. The local authorities were compromised. That much was clear from his confrontation with the police captain. Going to them would only result in more evidence disappearing, more witnesses silenced. We need to take this federal, he decided, gathering the most crucial documents. Tomorrow morning, I'm driving to the FBI field office in the city. Jennifer reached for his hand, her eyes reflecting both fear and resolve. Be careful, Mike. These people have protected their secret for 7 years. They won't stop now. Outside, snow began to fall, covering Cedar Falls in a deceptive blanket of purity. While beneath the surface, the truth about Ashley Mitchell was finally clawing its way into the light. The federal agents arrived in Cedar Falls on a Tuesday morning, their black vehicles forming a somber procession down Main Street. Detective Mike Torres watched from the steps of the police station, a thick folder of evidence clutched in his hands. After 2 years of relentless pursuit, the pieces had finally aligned into an undeniable pattern of corruption and cover-up. Inside the conference room, Torres laid out the evidence methodically. Photographs of the Mackenzie Ranch property records linking to a shell company, the falsified hospital documentation, and the forensic analysis proving Ashley Mitchell's farewell note was forged. The federal investigators nodded gravely as Torres explained how local officials had orchestrated both the patrol officer's disappearance and the subsequent silence. This wasn't just negligence, Torres explained, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. This was deliberate obstruction at every level. Within 48 hours, the first resignation letter landed on the mayor's desk. By week's end, 3 more followed: the hospital administrator, a county judge, and the police captain himself. The web Torres had painstakingly mapped was unraveling with breathtaking speed. Jennifer Mitchell stood beside her mother's wheelchair in their living room, watching the evening news coverage with a mixture of vindication and renewed grief. Margaret reached for her daughter's hand, her fingers trembling, but her eyes clear. The stroke had weakened her body, but not her resolve to see justice for Ashley. Your sister would be proud, Margaret whispered, as the news anchor detailed the growing scandal. For the townspeople of Cedar Falls, the revelations were devastating. Neighbors who had prayed together at candlelight vigils now avoided eye contact at the grocery store. The church, once a sanctuary of shared hope, became a battleground of whispered accusations. Some defended the implicated officials as pillars of the community who deserved the benefit of doubt. Others demanded accountability, regardless of status. Torres found himself both celebrated and vilified. Anonymous thank you cards appeared in his mailbox, while "Outsider" was spray-painted across his car. His wife had already moved out weeks earlier, unable to compete with the ghost of Ashley Mitchell for her husband's attention. In his apartment, surrounded by case files and takeout containers, Torres received a call from Jennifer. Kevin Walsh had helped her arrange a small memorial at the site where they had found Ashley's belongings. Would he join them? The next morning, as they stood together on the windswept hill overlooking the Mackenzie Ranch, Torres felt the weight of the past 2 years lifting slightly. The truth had cost him dearly: his marriage, his reputation, likely his career. But watching Jennifer place wildflowers on the freshly marked ground, he knew with certainty that some prices were worth paying. Justice, however imperfect, had finally begun to emerge from the shadows. Cedar Falls stood transformed. A community shattered, then slowly rebuilt by the weight of truth. The town square, once adorned with missing posters of Ashley Mitchell, now displayed a permanent memorial, a bronze plaque etched with not only her name, but also those of 5 other victims whose cases had been linked to the same sprawling conspiracy. Margaret Mitchell, leaning heavily on her cane, her body weakened by stroke but her spirit unbroken, touched the cold metal bearing her daughter's name. "They thought we would forget," she whispered to Jennifer, who stood beside her mother with protective vigilance. "They never understood what a mother's love can endure." The revelations had torn through Cedar Falls like wildfire. 3 hospital administrators faced federal charges. The politician whose family had ties to Bill Morrison resigned in disgrace. 2 former police officers were indicted for evidence tampering. The regional newspaper, which had once dismissed Torres as an outsider stirring trouble, now published a 6-part exposé on institutional corruption. Jennifer Mitchell had emerged as an unexpected voice of healing. Standing before the crowd gathered for the annual Remembrance Vigil, her voice steady despite the emotion visible in her eyes, she spoke words that resonated through the hushed gathering. "My sister wore her badge to protect this community," she said, the candlelight illuminating her face. The greatest dishonor to her memory would be allowing bitterness to destroy what she loved. Mike Torres watched from the periphery, his professional vindication offering little comfort against the personal cost. His marriage had ended. His career hung in limbo, respected by federal authorities, but viewed with suspicion by local law enforcement agencies wary of whistleblowers. The detective had lost weight, silver now threading through his dark hair, but his eyes remained sharp and determined. Kevin Walsh stood nearby, his geological expertise having proven crucial in uncovering the truth. He and Jennifer exchanged glances across the crowd. Their relationship, forged in shared purpose, had weathered the storm of public scrutiny and private grief. For Margaret, the confirmation of Ashley's fate had brought a strange peace. The uncertainty that had haunted her for years had been replaced by the grim certainty of mourning. She had buried her daughter properly, said the prayers that had waited too long to be spoken. Some people ask if it was worth it. Torres said later that evening, sitting with Jennifer and Kevin on the porch of the Mitchell home. All this pain, all this division. Jennifer looked toward the horizon where the sun set over Cedar Falls. Ashley would say yes, she answered simply. Truth always costs something, but lies cost everything. The 3 sat in companionable silence, bound by an experience few could comprehend, the terrible price of justice and the unexpected grace of finding allies in the darkest of journeys.